That's a good title. I like that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining Building and Fire Board of Appeals meeting of July 15th. We may begin the agenda today with a roll call, please.
Item 1, roll call. Board Member John Tatulian.
Present.
Board Member Michael Chakmajian.
Here.
Chairman Eric Kashishian.
Here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Going on to item number 2, Chairman. Report regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for this meeting will be posted on Thursday, July 9, 2015, on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website. This was completed already. Item number 3, presentations and commendations. Today we have none. Item number 4, approval of minutes dated February 18th, 2015.
Okay, this is just a motion to approve.
Correct.
Okay, if there are no questions, I'd like to make a motion to approve the meetings of the approval of the minutes of February 18, 2015.
Okay. Could we get a second?
Second.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion. Well, there was not a first. He entered the first.
I entertain the motion.
I'll make the first
You wanna
motion.
make a first
To
motion?
accept the meeting minutes as presented.
Okay.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to do a roll call. Board Member Michael Chakmajian.
Yes.
Board Member John Tatulian.
Yes.
And Chairman Kashishian.
Yes.
Okay. Oral communications, today we have none. For item number 6, old business, today we have none. Going on to item 7, new business. Final review of proposed ordinance, adding section 105.1.1 to the Glendale Building and Safety Code 2014, establishing an expedited permitting process for small residential rooftop solar systems.
All right, I would like to introduce the amendment to you, give you a little bit of background. This ordinance is mandated by the state of California. It's limited to applications for single-family dwellings, small systems that are rooftop mounted. This ordinance does not apply to commercial projects, to multifamily projects, or large residential projects that exceed the definition of the small energy system. This was mandated by Assembly Bill 2188. It includes, is required to reference a checklist of applicable requirements, which will be posted on the city's website, and deals with fees and inspections. We used a template for the ordinance that was published by the state of California in order to be more uniform with other jurisdictions throughout the state, allowing uniformity with for the solar industry with this ordinance. I did want to point out the first part of the ordinance does have definitions where it defines those elements that are mandated by the state in defining what is a small residential rooftop energy system, a solar energy system, and a few other definitions that are in there that pertain to this application. I wanted to point out one of the requirements on this is this ordinance needs to be in effect before September 30, 2015, as mandated by the state. And so we're asking for this board's input on our ordinance so that we may take it to council for adoption by the required date. At this point, do you have any questions or concerns about the ordinance itself?
Are you going to go over the ordinance, or we've already read?
I can step through it.
We are already familiar with it, I assume, right? We've already read it.
Okay.
So if you just going to go through the comments and questions, that's fine. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that we had any comments or questions about that, and if you wanted me to go through it in more detail, I can do so for your benefit.
Okay, please, let's hear it.
Okay.
Before we ask any questions.
Okay, so then, as I started to say, it begins with the definitions as mandated by the state. This only applies to small residential rooftop solar energy systems. It applies to both solar photovoltaic and solar water. But again, the limitation is the small residential. You have to meet certain size specifications in order for this ordinance to be applicable. If you exceed that, then this ordinance does not apply. We have part of the requirements on this is the checklist, which we reference, the state standard checklist, and the permitting process. At the moment, we only have the manual process. We do not have the ability to accept electronic submittals at this time. We are working on that application and expect that to be in testing before the end of this calendar year. Fees are as specified by Senate Bill 1222. Our fee ordinance adopted by council specifically references that Senate bill. So we are in compliance with those regulations as well. We define the submittal process where the applicant presents the information to us, and we've reviewed for completeness. If the application and the supporting documents are determined to be incomplete, we can notify the applicant of what additional information we're required to be provided with before we can accept the application. Once the application is deemed complete, then we can review it for compliance and issue the permit within a timely manner. We don't have a specific timeline specified in the ordinance. The other part of the ordinance that's mandated by state is with the inspection. It does limit to a maximum of 1 inspection. However, if that inspection fails, then there is no limitation on subsequent inspections in order to get proper compliance of the application before we final the permit. It also defines that the utility is not part of that single inspection. The utility is separate. In this case, the utility is Glendale Water and Power. But the utility, before accepting the installation to be connected to the grid, they may have their own specific requirements and safety regulations that they verify before energizing, allowing the final energizing of the system and therefore connecting to the electrical grid for the photovoltaic. For the solar water, there is no utility requirements. And that is specified in the ordinance under sections J and K. Standard under Section 2 is the environmental determination, and under Section 3, severability. It allows us, we've determined that it is exempt under CEQA, and should the state mandate other requirements or revoke this requirement, this Section 3 allows us to also revoke this ordinance. That's pretty much it. Its effective date is the 30th date after its passage. California state regulations indicate that it must be in effect by September 30th, 2015.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Board members, do you have any questions?
I actually have a question.
Please.
When we're talking about a single inspection, is there a rough inspection and a final inspection, or is there just a final
There's
inspection?
just basically final inspection as specified by the state. They're trying to, as part of the streamlining, rather than having perhaps a fire inspection, an electrical inspection, or a framing inspection, a rough electrical inspection before the final electrical inspection, they're trying to streamline that and have that all done at one time. Some of the installations, some of the current technologies that the solar photovoltaic industry has developed, the installation goes very, very quickly, and the whole thing is done from start to finish within a half a day in some cases for these small projects. And to have a rough electrical and then a final electrical, or a rough framing and then a final, you're coming back twice in the same day in a lot of these situations.
And the inspection is done by the combination building inspector or fire or...
At this moment in time, due to staffing, it may be done by a combination inspector. It may be done by an electrical inspector that has been trained what to look for the framing. So that way, should we not have enough combo inspectors available, or should we not have an electrical inspector available, we have the staff to be able to actually perform the inspection as requested without having to delay the inspection for the appropriate staff member to return to work.
And the way it qualifies for small is based on the kilowatts it generates.
Correct. You've got to be less than 10 kilowatts in order to qualify under this. Some of the larger arrays we've seen on some of our larger residences have exceeded the 10 kilowatts.
Any idea what 10 kilowatts will cover? What household, what size? I mean, just to put it in perspective for viewers, what it means.
It's 10 panels in an array, or 5 panels in 2 arrays, and each panel is approximately 2 feet by 4 feet.
I can safely say that 10 kilowatts is almost equivalent to 40 amps maybe, so I think we're talking about maybe a 40 amp breaker in an existing panel. Is that what it is?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. And it says, you mentioned residential single family, but I think the ordinance also calls for duplexes, correct?
Yes, you are correct.
So does this mean one for each unit, or a 10 kilowatt service for a duplex, in case it's a duplex? Or can it be one for each?
It would be a 10 kilowatt service.
For each one?
For
each unit?
I'm going to say it somewhat depends.
I see.
I believe it would be for each unit, because under current regulations, each unit is required to have their own electrical service, so therefore it would apply. But some of our older duplexes have a single service, and then they have sub-panel for each dwelling unit. Mm-hmm. If we were to encounter that situation, unless they're willing to split to have 2 separate services, one for each dwelling unit, they would be limited to just one 10 amp system.
Okay. Questions? I still have one more. As far as the checklist is concerned, I understand it's being developed right now. Would the checklist eventually be part of the ordinance?
The checklist wasn't required to be part of the ordinance, just simply to be posted on the city's website. So once we have that completed, it will be posted on the city's website.
Okay.
Currently, the city, when they give a final for solar installation, as we have here, is it the same practice where they submit a clearance to the utility company? Are they following the same procedure?
Correct. Once they've basically approved the installation, then we notify GWP requesting a release. Then GWP, our Glendale Water and Power, sends a representative out to confirm the connection to the meter is in compliance with their regulations, and the inverters are in compliance with their regulations before they energize the meter.
So the building inspector would observe that inverter and all the technical issues that come along with it, as well as the GWP, Glendale Water and Power person who energizes it?
Both individuals typically look at the inverters, but our jurisdiction, our building inspections jurisdiction, stops prior to the meter. The actual connection to the meter falls under the utilities jurisdiction, and it would be their inspectors that need to confirm that before allowing the system to be powered.
And is the utility also under the same mandate to provide expedited inspection and whatnot, or no?
No, there is
Okay.
there is no regulation that affect the utilities at this point in time.
Understood. As far as the height of the building is concerned, here it says the installation should not exceed the height of the building. Are we referring to the zoning height of the building or the building code height of the building, or does it matter?
It would apply to both, either one.
Okay.
And typically for single-family dwellings, it's a very
usually-
unusual dwelling that would exceed the height by building code.
Well, I would think the zoning height will govern, especially in a hillside case.
In most situations, that would be correct.
Right. So it should not exceed that height as well.
Correct.
And how is that determined by the building plan checker, who's only allowed to spend a very short period of time, I understand, if the package is complete, to do an over-the-counter plan check and then issue the permit? How is that going to be verified?
It may be that the plan checker may consult with on-site zoning personnel to confirm that there are no issues, but again, that would be a rare situation.
Okay. Just to make sure we covered all the comments. There is one more comment I would like to make, if I may, on page 3 of the draft ordinance. Section 2 refers to the electronic signatures and forms and applications and whatnot, and I notice here that we say this, due to city's technical limitation, we cannot accept that. I would like that be reworded, if possible, to soften that statement.
Okay, I can have that reworded to indicate, as I had discussed earlier, that application to accept online is currently under development and will be in effect soon. So I can rephrase this to include that information.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from board members?
Pretty straightforward.
Mr. Halper, is there anything you want to share with us? You've seen a lot of those installations. Any issues with them?
Yes, no, we have no issues. We've been working very closely with building
Excellent.
safety on it.
As far as the location of the panels themselves on the roof and whatnot, that's being inspected by the building inspector or fire?
Yeah, we look at them on the plan review. It's regulated by code
Oh, okay.
in order to allow fire department operational access to the roof.
However, that's verified by the building inspector out in the field based on the approved plans.
Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that these small systems, as we talk, as we refer to 10 kilowatt systems, they do not have any storage, right? They do not store electrical power. I mean, if the sun is out, you have power. If there is no sun in the evening, for instance, you cannot plug in your car and use that electricity to charge your car, for instance. Is that correct?
Currently, technology, that is correct, but the solar industry is developing battery systems
I see.
to allow the storage for a short time period, 4 to 8 hours.
Okay. Anything will help.
Yes. Yes, they've just got to get the battery industry up to snuff, and they're making tremendous changes in that technology. So I would anticipate that within the next 3 or 4 years that we'll start seeing those systems.
Oh, clearly the solar industry is still very new and it's being developed. There's no doubt about it. So I'm sure we're going to see a lot smaller panels in the future, hopefully, a lot more efficient systems in the future. So that's the right thing to do.
Okay, if there are no further comments, can we have a recommendation that with the change suggested previously that we are good to take this to our city council?
Sure, absolutely. I'd like to make a motion recommending that City Council introduce and adopt the ordinance amending the Glendale Building Code 2014 to add an expedited permitting process for a small residential rooftop solar system, subject to the minor changes that we discussed that will be made in the text of the ordinance. We don't have to come back for that, right?
Correct. You don't have to come back to that.
Right. Yes. I'm sorry.
If I may, so as the president or chairperson of the board, the motion would need to be made by one of your colleagues and then seconded by one of your colleagues.
I'm sorry.
Entertain them.
May I entertain a motion to adopt or recommend to adopt the City Council to introduce the ordinance, please?
Or do you want?
I got only 2 people here.
We go left, right,
Flip a
left,
coin.
right. So.
So I'll make the motion to approve.
I will second that motion.
We'll proceed with the roll call if that's okay. Board Member Chakmajian.
Here.
Board Member Tatulian.
Yes.
Chairman Kishishian.
Yes.
So we will go on to item number 9, since we already addressed the comments and questions from commissioners, if that's okay with you. We have reports, information only, the building activity report and monthly income summary dated June 2015.
Yes, I'd like to point out you've been given the June 2015 report, which is our fiscal year-end report. If you look at the columns on the building activity report, the year-to-date information, at the very bottom, you can see where the net total dwelling units, for the fiscal year 2014-15, have permitted 1,095 dwelling units, whereas the previous year was 778 dwelling units. So as you can see, our multifamily projects are quite numerous, and I anticipate similar numbers for this current fiscal year. Also, I'd like to note that valuations under year-to-date at the total, valuations of projects permitted were $313 million compared to $223 million the previous fiscal year. So, and the previous fiscal year was larger than the 12-13 fiscal year. So our construction activity has been increasing year after year. We've done very well coming out of the recession with a large number of projects. The multifamily dwelling projects are not the only projects, not the only large projects that we've got going in the city. And our valuations show that. If you flip to the monthly income summary, at the very bottom of or towards the bottom, the total column for the current year to date, we brought in $9,269,000 in total building fees. There are a number of fees that are on this page that are collected on behalf of other agencies, such as the Glendale Unified School District, or the construction debris deposit, parks and library, development impact fees. Those fees are not included in this $9 million number. and comparing to the previous fiscal year, which was $7,485,000, we've had a significant increase in our total fees. If you look towards the top under the line subtotal column A, and the current year-to-date column, the fees from just plan check and permitting, not our expedited plan check fees, not some of the other surcharges that we collect, but just the basic permit fees themselves are up by about $800,000 over the fees that we collected last year. So we've had this last fiscal year a significant increase in our construction work, both plan check and in the inspection side. We've been kind of scrambling, trying to come up with enough staff to keep up with the demand, and we'll be bringing several new employees on board. We just hired a new plan check staff member 2 weeks ago, and we've got another one that will be starting sometime in the next 3 weeks.
Excellent.
So that's all I wanted to point out. If you have any questions or concerns or anything you want to have further information on these reports.
On this, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to mention the hours, they were adjusted approximately 2 years ago. The plan check hours from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. How do you see that still staying the same or possibly changing to meet the demand that you're showing here on paper for plan check and
At the moment, it's going to stay the same. The times were changed as a result of loss of staff. We lost approximately 25% of our administrative staff, and then the various groups that support our counter operation, Public Works Engineering, Fire, Zoning, and Building, all lost plan review staff as well at that time period. So in order to provide service with the staffing levels that we had, we ended up reducing our counter hours. There is a study currently underway from the city manager's office looking at changing those hours, whether we expand them and reduce the number of days that we're open or we leave them the same. That's all part of that study. And until that study is complete and looking at the staffing levels, because again, this last year we lost more staff, and doesn't do any good to be open if you don't have a staff person there to man the counter. And where we run into difficulty is trying to deal with the lunch breaks. We'd have to, with the current staff that we have available, we would have to basically shut down for the lunch breaks. So we're looking at, that's like I said, part of the study that the city manager's office is working on to see what alternatives we have to make that whole system work with the current customer load.
So currently, the office is open for walk-ins until 12 noon.
Correct.
And then you can schedule an appointment, if I'm not mistaken, for the afternoon session?
The afternoon appointments would be where there's not be financial transactions. So, for example, if you had a project in that was being reviewed and you needed to make an appointment to do a recheck, you could make that appointment after our public counters closed.
So even with the hiring of the new plan review engineers that you just mentioned, is the technical staff still understaffed, or you're, as far as technical, you're fully staffed up?
We're still short administrative staff to handle a lot of the financial transactions for all of the groups that we have.
But how about the engineers?
And then building plan check is getting new people, but the other divisions and departments are still short-staffed as well. So to have enough staff to be able to staff our public counter for a longer time period during the day would have consequences to their operation that may not be beneficial.
I noticed that there's a huge jump here from previous year to the current year on the parks mitigation fee. It went from $700,000 to 8.2 million.
Correct.
It's almost as much as the whole development department's income.
That fee, when it was first adopted, was adopted with the tiered system. So when it first came into effect, the development fees were extremely low. And they were intended to tier. So after 2 years, they would double. After another 2 years, they would double again. And after another 2 years, they would do their final doubling to actually meet the actual cost as originally determined. So initially, the number was small enough. The first double really wasn't significant. But this last time, during this fiscal year that the report is for, they implemented one of the doubles and then a portion of a double that had been previously delayed. So it had sort of a compounding effect.
And those fees will continue. They're not going to go reverse down. They're
They're
continue
not
at these
going to
levels.
reverse down. There's still a portion of an increase still to come at some point in the future. The fees that we are collecting are not equal to the cost of providing those additional services at this time.
And what is a parks mitigation fee used for? What are those funds?
It's used to purchase land, to develop parks, and to upgrade existing parks.
That fee is collected on every project or certain projects?
It's most projects where there's additional square footage.
I see. Residential,
so-
commercial, doesn't matter, right?
Right,
I see.
right.
Very good.
I think it's a per unit fee also, right? If you're
For the
multifamily.
residential, it's a per unit fee, so if you're adding a bedroom or bathroom, it doesn't apply. If you're adding a dwelling unit, then on the residential, then it applies. Commercial, since there's no units and no way to do it, they did that on a square footage basis.
Square footage.
So as soon as you add square footage, there's an exception, a certain percentage if you're below, I think it's 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet. If you're below that, it doesn't kick in. If you're above that, then the fee kicks in.
So if
And
your
then-
building is a brand-new single-family dwelling, that also applies as one unit? Or
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Actually, if we can just take a look at those numbers, the building activity report, as far as single-family dwellings and multifamily and garages, the thing that strikes me, and I see that here, fiscal years to the years to date, we had 7 single-family dwellings. I assume those are brand new.
Yes.
And 2 duplexes and 9 multifamilies. But then again, when I'm looking at the garages, detached garages, why do we have 29 detached garages? What do people do with detached garages?
A lot of our garages were built in the 30s and 40s when they weren't two-car garages. They were single-car
They're tiny.
garages.
They're called 2-car.
Well, people are saying I can squeeze 2 tiny cars in, but the city's zoning regulations have a minimum size for a 2-car garage, and they have requirements that kick in as to when you're required to have a 2-car garage. So a lot of times, a single-family dwelling addition of additional bedrooms, once it gets over a certain size, then it triggers the requirement that you now have to comply with the required parking under today's regulations, and therefore it's triggering a larger garage. Rather than trying to make an existing garage a couple feet larger, they're typically demolishing and rebuilding, which is why you see that large and that high a number.
So a non-conforming garage must be changed to a conforming garage before you can add a bedroom to an existing house.
It depends on how many existing bedrooms there are. Once you
I
get
see.
over a certain threshold, then yes, it does trigger that complying 2-car garage.
Yes, that makes sense now. Well, thank you for that report. Other questions?
Going on to item number 10, if everything's clear to go. Adjournment, if we can have a motion and then a second, if it's okay with you, gentlemen.
There's no other questions. May I have a motion to it?
Yes.
I can make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second the motion.
I'll do one last roll call. Chairman Chuck Majian
Yes.
and Board Member Tatulian
Yes.
and Chairman Kishishian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.